Yo, something about this whole Boston Richey situation is not adding up. And the crazy part? Most people online are reacting to the headline, but nobody's really paying attention to what actually got him caught in the first place. Because this wasn't one of those random celebrity arrests where cameras just happened to be rolling. Nah. According to people close to the situation, the attention was already building behind the scenes long before the public even heard the story. And once investigators started connecting certain moves, things reportedly escalated fast. Now here's where it gets interesting. Everybody keeps saying Boston Richey facing jail time, but they're leaving out the part that could seriously change how this whole thing plays out. See, there's growing talk that this may not just be about one incident. There are rumors certain people around the case allegedly started cooperating, and if that's true, that completely changes the pressure on everybody involved. And honestly, the internet caught on to one detail almost immediately. Fans noticed Boston Richey suddenly moving different online, posts disappearing, energy changing, certain people distancing themselves quietly instead of publicly defending him like before. That's usually when you know something bigger might be happening behind closed doors. But wait, this is the part nobody's talking about. There's speculation this situation could start exposing other names connected behind the scenes. And if that happens, this could go from rapper drama to a full industry problem overnight. That's why some people think the silence around this case feels way louder than usual. Now, I'm not here to throw fake accusations or push internet rumors as facts. But when you start seeing patterns like this, you have to ask questions. Because if even half of what's being whispered is true, Boston Richey might not just be fighting headlines anymore. He could be fighting for his entire career. What makes this whole situation feel different isn't just the headline. It's how quiet everything went right after it broke. Usually, when something like this hits the internet, you get instant reactions, people picking sides, friends jumping in to defend, lawyers making statements, somebody saying something loud. But here, it's like everything just slowed down. And when things slow down like that in situations like this, it usually means there's more happening behind the scenes than what's being shown in public. Because if you really pay attention, the timing of all this doesn't feel random. The way things unfolded suggests this wasn't just a sudden moment that got out of control. It looks more like something that had been building quietly, piece by piece, until it reached a point where it couldn't stay hidden anymore. And once that line gets crossed, it's not about damage control. It's about survival. Now think about this for a second. When someone in that position starts moving differently overnight, that's not just coincidence. People notice the shift. The energy changed. Moves that used to be loud became low-key. Interactions that were public suddenly went silent. And when that happens, it usually means one thing: awareness. Not just awareness of the public watching, but awareness of something bigger closing in. And that's where things start getting uncomfortable. Because there's a difference between being caught in a situation and being part of something that's been under watch for a while. Those are two completely different levels of pressure. One is reactive, you deal with it as it comes. The other? That's when every move starts to matter. Every past decision, every connection, every conversation, it all becomes relevant. What's really raising eyebrows right now is how quickly certain people started creating distance. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly stepping back. No big statements. No public defense. Just space. And in situations like this, silence from people who were once close can say more than words ever could. Because let's be real, loyalty in that world is usually loud when everything is good. But when things get complicated, that's when you find out who's willing to stay visible and who would rather disappear into the background. And right now, a lot of people are choosing the background. But here's where it takes another turn. There's growing conversation that what's happening right now might not even be the full picture yet. And if that's true, then what we're seeing could just be the surface. Situations like this don't always unfold all at once. Sometimes they come in layers, one detail at a time, one revelation after another. And each new piece can shift the entire narrative. That's why some people aren't reacting loudly yet. They're watching, waiting. Because when things feel incomplete, the smartest move isn't to jump, it's to observe. And right now, there are a lot of eyes on this situation that aren't saying anything publicly. And you have to ask yourself why? Because if this was simple, it would already be loud. It would already be clear. But the fact that it's not, that's what's making people pay closer attention. Another detail people picked up on is how quickly the conversation online started changing direction. At first, it was all surface-level reactions. But then, slowly, people started asking different questions. Not just what happened, but how did this happen? And more importantly, what else is connected to this? And those kinds of questions don't come out of nowhere. They come from patterns, from small details that don't quite match the official story, from moments that feel slightly off but not obvious enough to prove anything yet. And when enough of those moments start stacking up, people begin to look deeper. Now, nobody's claiming to have the full truth right now. And that's exactly what makes this situation so unpredictable. Because when information is limited, speculation fills the gap. And sometimes speculation ends up pointing closer to reality than people expect. But here's the thing that really stands out: the lack of denial. Not loud denial, not aggressive pushback, just absence. And in situations where reputation is on the line, silence can be strategic. It can mean lawyers are involved. It can mean there's more to consider before saying anything publicly. Or it can mean that speaking too soon could make things worse. Either way, it tells you this isn't being taken lightly. Because when everything is at stake, career, image, future, you don't move carelessly. Every word, every action becomes calculated. And that's exactly what it feels like is happening right now. Calculated silence, calculated distance, calculated moves. And if that's the case, then this situation might not be anywhere near its final form yet. It might just be getting started. And the deeper you look into situations like this, the more you start realizing that what's visible is usually just a fraction of what's actually happening. Because when pressure starts building behind closed doors, people don't just react, they adjust. Quietly, strategically, sometimes even urgently. That's exactly the kind of shift people believe they're seeing right now. Because if everything was under control, there would be confidence. There would be presence. There would be clear messaging. Instead, what people are noticing feels more like hesitation. Like every move is being double-checked before it happens. And that kind of energy doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from knowing the situation is bigger than what the public sees. Now here's where things get even more layered. There's been growing talk that certain details connected to this situation didn't just surface randomly. Some are saying information may have already been circulating in smaller circles before it ever reached the public. And if that's true, then what we're seeing now isn't the beginning. It's the moment things finally reached a point where they couldn't stay contained anymore. And when things reach that point, the pace changes. Decisions get made faster. Risks get higher. And the room for mistakes gets smaller. That's why the behavior around this situation feels so controlled right now. Not calm, controlled. There's a difference. Calm means things are stable. Controlled means things are being managed carefully to avoid making them worse. And people can feel that difference. Another thing that stands out is how certain conversations seem to be getting redirected almost immediately. Every time a new detail starts gaining attention, it doesn't stay in focus for long. Something else comes in and shifts the narrative. And when that happens repeatedly, it raises a serious question. Who benefits from the attention moving away? Because in situations like this, attention is everything. What people focus on becomes the story. And what gets ignored? That's where things can stay hidden the longest. So when the focus keeps shifting, some people start wondering if that's accidental or intentional. Now, to be clear, none of this confirms anything on its own. But patterns don't need confirmation to raise concern. They just need consistency. And right now, the consistency people are noticing is what's making this situation feel heavier than a typical headline. And then there's the legal side of things. Because once legal pressure enters the picture, everything changes. Conversations stop being public and start becoming private. Moves stop being emotional and start becoming strategic. And most importantly, silence becomes a tool instead of a reaction. That's why you're not seeing loud responses or quick explanations. Because in situations where legal consequences are possible, saying the wrong thing at the wrong time can have real impact. Not just on public opinion, but on outcomes. So instead of reacting, the focus shifts to positioning. Positioning for what comes next. And that's the part nobody can predict yet. Because depending on how this unfolds, there are multiple directions this could go. It could slow down and fade out quietly. Or it could escalate, bringing more attention, more questions, and possibly more people into the spotlight. And if it does escalate, that's when things start getting complicated. Because once additional names, connections, or details begin to surface, the situation stops being isolated. It becomes something bigger. Something that reaches beyond one person and starts affecting a wider circle. That's why some people are watching this so closely without saying much. Because they understand that the first wave of information is rarely the full story. It's usually just enough to introduce the situation. What comes after, that's what defines it. And right now, it still feels like we're in that early phase where pieces are moving, but the full picture hasn't been revealed yet. Which brings everything back to that same question people keep asking quietly. What aren't we seeing yet? Because whatever that answer is, it's probably the part that matters most. And this is exactly where situations like this start separating surface-level stories from the ones that actually leave a mark. Because once you get past the initial shock, past the reactions, past the noise, that's when the real pressure begins to show. Not publicly, internally. Because think about what this moment actually represents. It's not just about what already happened, it's about what could still come out. And that uncertainty? That's the part that changes everything. When you don't know what's next, every decision becomes heavier. Every move feels like it carries consequences you can't fully predict yet. That's why people close to situations like this tend to move carefully, sometimes even cautiously. Not because they don't have anything to say, but because saying the wrong thing at the wrong time can open doors that were still closed. And right now it feels like a lot of doors are still closed, but not locked. Because the way this is unfolding, it doesn't feel finished. Feels paused, like something is being held back, either intentionally or because the timing isn't right yet. And when timing becomes a factor, that usually means there are still moving pieces behind the scenes that haven't settled. Now here's something people aren't saying out loud, but they're definitely thinking. When situations involve multiple layers, connections, timelines, different people involved, it's very rare for everything to come out at once. Instead, it comes in phases. One detail leads to another. One revelation creates space for the next. And before you even realize it, the narrative you thought you understood starts shifting in real time. That's the risk here. Because if new information starts surfacing, it doesn't just add to the story. It can completely change how the earlier details are viewed. Things that seemed minor suddenly feel important. Things that were ignored start getting re-examined. And that's when public perception can turn fast. Faster than most people expect. And perception matters more than people like to admit. Because even before anything is officially confirmed or denied, the way people feel about a situation starts shaping its outcome. Opportunities shift. Support changes. The energy around someone either tightens or starts slipping away. And once that shift begins, it's hard to reverse completely. That's why this moment feels so critical. Because it's not just about responding, it's about stabilizing, containing, trying to prevent things from spreading further than they already have. And the way that's done isn't always visible to the public. Most of it happens quietly through decisions that don't make headlines but still carry weight. But here's where it gets real. Control only works up to a certain point. After that, the situation starts controlling itself. And if this has already reached that stage, then what happens next might not be something anyone can fully manage anymore. It becomes reactive instead of planned. And once things turn reactive, outcomes become a lot harder to predict. That's when you start seeing unexpected turns, unexpected statements, unexpected silence, unexpected shifts in who's involved and who's no longer around. And those shifts, they don't happen randomly. They happen because something behind the scenes changed, something significant enough to force a different approach. And people are watching for those changes right now, even if they don't realize it consciously. They're picking up on small details: who's speaking, who isn't, what's being said, what's being avoided. Because in moments like this, what's missing can be just as important as what's present. So the situation sits in this space. Unfinished, uncertain, and quietly building. Not exploding. Not fading. Just building. And that's what makes it unpredictable. Because when something builds without release, it eventually reaches a point where it has to go somewhere. Either it gets resolved quietly behind the scenes, or it surfaces in a way that nobody can ignore anymore. And right now, nobody knows which direction this is heading. But one thing is clear. Whatever happens next is going to define everything that comes after. And this is the moment where everything either tightens up or starts slipping out of control completely. Because when a situation reaches this level of attention, it doesn't just stay contained to the people directly involved. It starts pulling in outside pressure, media, legal voices, industry figures, and each one adds a different layer to what's already building. And the more layers that get added, the harder it becomes to keep the narrative steady. Because now it's not just about what actually happened. It's about how it's being interpreted, how it's being discussed, and most importantly, who's choosing to speak on it. And right now, that balance feels fragile. One unexpected statement, one leaked detail, one shift in tone, and everything could tilt in a completely different direction overnight. That's why the silence we're seeing doesn't feel empty. It feels loaded, like something is being held in place. Because when people stay quiet this long in a situation this visible, it's usually not by accident. It's intentional, strategic, measured. Every pause has a reason, even if that reason isn't clear yet. And sometimes that reason is simple, waiting for the right moment. But timing can be unpredictable, because while one side might be trying to control when things come out, other factors don't always follow that plan. Information has a way of surfacing when it wants to, not when it's convenient. And when that happens, it can catch people off guard, especially if they thought they had more time. That's where things can shift fast. Because once new details hit at the wrong moment, the entire structure that's been carefully managed can start to crack. And when it cracks, it doesn't always break clean. It spreads. It reaches places nobody expected. And suddenly, the situation isn't just about defense anymore, it becomes about response. Immediate response. And the pressure that comes with that? It's different. It forces decisions without full control. It pushes reactions instead of strategies. And once that shift happens, it's a lot harder to steer things back into a controlled position. That's why people who understand these situations aren't just watching what's happening. They're watching how close it is to that tipping point. Because every situation like this has a moment where it either stabilizes or escalates. And right now it feels like it's right on that edge. Another thing people are starting to notice is how selective the visibility has become. Certain voices are louder, others completely gone. Certain angles are being highlighted, while others barely get mentioned. And when visibility starts narrowing like that, it raises questions about what's being prioritized and what's being left out. Because in high-pressure situations, focus is rarely neutral. It's directed, sometimes by media cycles, sometimes by people involved, sometimes by circumstances that nobody can fully control. But regardless of the source, that direction shapes how the public understands everything. And once a certain version of the story starts settling in, it becomes harder to shift, even if new information comes out later. That's why this phase matters so much, because this is where narratives get formed. Not finalized, but formed. And once they start forming, they influence everything that follows. How people react, who steps in, what gets believed, what gets questioned. It all builds from this stage. But here's the part that keeps things uncertain. Formation doesn't mean accuracy. Just because a narrative is taking shape doesn't mean it's complete. It doesn't mean it's correct. Just means it's the version people have right now. And if more details come out later, that version can change, sometimes slightly, sometimes completely. And when it changes completely, that's when you see real impact. Because then it's not just about updating the story, it's about reevaluating everything that came before it. Every reaction, every assumption, every early conclusion. And not everyone adjusts to that shift the same way. Some double down, some step back, some disappear from the conversation entirely. And all of that creates movement. Movement that's hard to predict, hard to control, and sometimes impossible to reverse once it starts. So the situation stays right here. Balance between what's known and what's still hidden, between control and exposure, between silence and whatever comes next. And if you're really paying attention, you can feel it. Something is about to give. The only question is, which side gives first? So now it comes down to you. Because at the end of the day, situations like this don't just unfold on their own, they unfold in front of an audience that decides what gets attention and what gets ignored. And right now, you're part of that audience that's actually paying attention to the details most people scroll past. If you've been following everything up to this point, then you already know this isn't just another headline that fades away in a few days. There's something deeper here, something that hasn't fully surfaced yet. And the only way you catch those shifts early is by staying locked in before everyone else catches on. So don't just watch from a distance and miss how this plays out. Stay connected, because the moment new information drops, the moment something changes, the moment this situation takes that turn everybody's quietly waiting for, you'll want to see it as it happens, not after the story has already been rewritten. And trust me, when things like this start building the way they are right now, they don't just disappear. They evolve. So if you want real updates, not watered-down versions, if you want to catch the details people overlook, and if you want to stay ahead of where this story is actually going instead of where people think it's going, make sure you're tapped in. Because what comes next? That's the part that changes everything.